Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're really going to dig into something. It's a topic that might make you see our neighbors a little differently. Yeah, have you ever wondered if Canada really is as green as everyone says? Well, we found this paper, Parallels Between the Canadian and American Environmental and Social Dynamics. And honestly, it's pretty eye-opening.
Really?
Yeah, it turns out, despite some differences on the surface, the US and Canada, they have a lot of the same patterns when you look at how their economies impact the environment.
Interesting.
And you know who gets hit hardest.
Let me guess. Yeah, Indigenous population.
Exactly, so we're going to be challenging some assumptions today, unpacking history and uncovering some uncomfortable truths.
First, let's look at the treadmill of production. That's the idea that both countries always need more economic growth, even if it means using up resources, polluting the environment, and leaving communities behind to struggle.
So it's like a treadmill at the gym. You're going and going and going, constantly producing for profit maximization's sake.
Exactly. You got it. And just like a treadmill can burn you out, this constant need for growth can have awful consequences. Think about the Rust Belt in the US. It used to be this thriving industrial center and now abandoned factories, communities struggling to survive.
Yeah, I've driven through some of it, and it's really sad seeing those empty factories like ghosts of what used to be.
And you see those same things in Canada, just on a different scale. Look at the Alberta oil sands. The drive to get that oil has caused so much environmental damage. And who's left to deal with it? Often it's the Indigenous communities. They're dealing with contaminated water, polluted air, and their whole way of life disrupted.
It seems like there's this constant tension between making money in the short term and making sure things last in the long term. And a lot of times it feels like the environment and vulnerable communities are the ones who pay the price.
It brings us to the idea of environmental racism.
Right.
Have you heard of that term before?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it around, but I'm not sure I really get it. It sounds obviously terrible, but could you explain it a bit?
Of course. In the simplest terms, it means that marginalized communities, we're talking people of color, Indigenous populations, folks like that, they're the ones stuck with more environmental hazards than anyone else. It means pollution isn't spread out equally. It's often concentrated right where these communities are living, working, and raising their families.
So it's not just bad luck, it's like it's built into the system.
You got it. And this paper argues that it's happening in both the US and Canada. In the US, you see things like this. Your racialized group is a more accurate way to predict if you live near a toxic waste site than your income level. Wow, think about that. Your so-called race matters more than how much money you make when it comes to whether you're exposed to toxic hazards. That's a big
deal. That's really messed up. So it's not just about economic inequality. It's something much deeper, like this system that's been around forever that just doesn't value everyone equally.
Exactly. And Canada isn't off the hook either. Look at Grassy Narrows First Nation. Decades of mercury poisoning from industry have devastated that community. Their health, culture, their way of life, it's heartbreaking.
Right, Grassy Narrows, I remember reading about that. Those pictures of the contamination were just awful. But I guess what's even scarier is realizing that this isn't just a one-time thing, it's part of a bigger pattern.
Totally. And this pattern is directly connected to the histories of both countries. It's definitely a tough one, but it's not hopeless, and this is where the paper gets a bit more optimistic. It talks about how there are all these powerful environmental and social justice movements growing in both the US and Canada. And what's really interesting is how Indigenous communities are leading the way.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of the paper. It wasn't all bad news. It talked about how Indigenous communities aren't just fighting against these harmful projects, but they're also offering a different way of looking at the future, a way that respects the land and recognizes Indigenous sovereignty.
I agree, and they're not just thinking about themselves. These movements want clean water, clean air, and a healthy planet for everyone.
It's like they're saying, hey, we've been saying this all along, we're all connected, and if you hurt the earth, you hurt us.
All. That's a great way to put it. They're using generations of knowledge and experience to challenge the way we think about progress and development, and that's incredibly powerful.
They're really putting their foot down saying, is this really the best we can do? Isn't there a better way?
Yeah, they're not just talking, they're taking action.
Yeah.
They're coming up with solutions.
Exactly, and they're not waiting around for someone to give them permission. You know, they're like, we're doing this like with Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Oh yeah.
That was a turning point, don't you think?
Absolutely.
It brought so many Indigenous communities together and showed everyone what can happen when people stand up for what they believe in.
It wasn't just about that one pipeline either. Standing Rock was about Indigenous sovereignty. It was about the right to protect their land and water.
Exactly.
And it sparked a wave of activism, like the Idle No More movement in Canada.
Right. These movements that are still challenging the way things are, it's inspiring to see more and more people getting involved, not just Indigenous communities, but everyone.
Powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like these movements are showing us that we all have a role to play in making things better.
Absolutely. And what's really exciting is the idea of them working together.
Oh yeah, what if?
What if these movements in the US and Canada join forces?
Imagine.
Imagine what they could accomplish.
Sharing resources, strategies, legal expertise.
Right, it's
Like they say, united we stand, divided we fall. These problems don't stop at borders, right? So why should the solutions?
working together could really amplify their voices, put pressure on both governments, be a real force for change across North America.
So we started by talking about how the US and Canada have more in common than we might think, and it seems like that's true for the solutions too, not just the problems.
Absolutely. They both have these systems that put profit before people and the planet. Yeah, but you also see these amazing movements in both places. Movements fighting for real change, and they're led by Indigenous communities who want a better future for everyone.